Hello guys, I'm back and you're very welcome to this session, Love Thy RCs. I'm here with a super duper interesting RC passage, super duper interesting topic. I don't know if you've heard of this or not. It's something on epigenetics. So I'll take you over to the passage now. So this is the first slide there, 3 paragraphs. What do we generally do whenever we are doing RC together? I see, I glance at the passage. कितना बड़ा है 5 paragraphs. Oh, 7 paragraphs, not bad. 9 paragraphs, please, बेहोश मत हो. If I wanted, I could have abridged it, but I just wanted to give the whole of it so that later, when we are done with the RC, maybe you can just take the passage and sit and do your reading on this passage. ओके मजा आ जाएगा ये पढ़ के, क्योंकि जब मैंने पढ़ा था मुझे वैसे ही फील हुआ था. इसका टेंशन मत लो, क्वेश्चंस हम पहले देखेंगे एंड देन आई एम गोइंग टू शो यू हाउ टू डू स्मार्ट रीडिंग. ओके, लॉन्ग पैसेज है, आज आप ये सीख लो मेरे साथ. ओके, फर्स्ट क्वेश्चन, व्हाट डज इट से? Which of the following can be most reasonably inferred about what? About the researcher's interpretation of the results. Interpretation of the results bole to what? There must be some experiment mentioned in the passage. Now please remember this point, that whenever there's an experiment or a study, some kind of a survey done in the passage, try to focus on 3 things. Why was it done? The actual survey or study, and then what did they find out? The actual survey or study can be skimmed, but then why did they do it and what did they find out? These 2 things are like absolutely important. Okay? So after reading the question, I understand in like a second, a nanosecond, that okay, there's some experiment in the passage and I have to find out the researcher's interpretation. Obviously the researchers did that experiment to connect with the main idea, right? वरना क्यों कर रहे हैं वो? ऐसा तो हो नहीं सकता है. The author is talking about mice and epigenetics in the passage and the researchers came forward and they did a survey or they did an experiment on spiders and how they are 8-legged creatures. ऐसा तो हो नहीं सकता, right? Okay, next. Which of the following best explains why the researchers stressed methylation patterns rather than mutations in their conclusions? This is super specific. Go to the zone, mark your range like 2 lines up, 2 lines down. Cat me, you cannot mark with a pen or marker on the screen. So mark, when I say mark, your range means आपको आदत डालनी पड़ेगी. Get used to it, like expand your range like this. You spot it somewhere in the passage and then you do like this. Okay, so 2 lines up, 2 lines down, you're going to read and you're going to come back to this. This is an inferential question. Okay, best explains why this inference. The question is not saying inference or imply, but it is an inference question. Inferred ये तो directly बोल के inference है, right? Which of the following scenarios would most strongly support the conclusions of the experiment? A study, a group, a population. This is an application question, but for this you need to understand the conclusion of the experiment, right? Only after that can you juxtapose it with one of these examples. Then, if the researcher's hypothesis is correct, hypothesis is conclusion, which of the following would most likely be true in a related study on humans? Now, there is one actual paragraph there which talks about how this can be applied to humans. If CAT had abridged this passage for you, they would have deleted that human paragraph and then they would have given you this question, that based on your learning, how would you apply this to a study on humans? But I have kept that paragraph intact over there and it will be fun. Abhi dekhte hain, theek hai? So study on humans, again this is specific. So the questions are very good. You don't need to actually read the whole passage word for word, but we are going to do smart reading and you're going to follow my passage mapping technique. Okay, abhi chalo dekhte hain. This is the starting, right? I'm just going to mark it here. Para 1. Since the sequencing of the human genome in 2003, genetics has become one of the key frameworks for how we think about ourselves. Genetics, genes. From fretting about our health to debating how schools can accommodate neurotypal pupils, we reach for the idea that genes deliver answers. अब यहाँ पे एक ज्ञान point. In case you didn't understand this, please do not bother. यहाँ तो सिर्फ range बता रहा है, from fretting over our health to this. I don't need to understand that. अगर नहीं आया कोई बात नहीं, जाने दो. The thing is here. We reach for the idea that genes deliver answers to intimate questions about people's outcomes and identities. This is received wisdom. What is received wisdom? What people generally believe. The moment I read this, a thought comes to my mind. Is the author going to support this, or is he going to go against it and come up with some new research? This is how the general passage is. Okay. Now, recent research backs this up. Oh, so our author is supporting it, showing that complex traits such as temperament, longevity, okay, some extent hardwired, okay, now I'm skimming. Okay, author to agree kar raha hai. Our education, theek hai, what if, but there's a question here. And there's but here. Pause. I started skimming the second para thinking that the author is supporting it completely. But what if the question of genetic inheritance were even more nuanced, layered, with complex things? What if the old polarized debate about the competing influences of nature and nurture was due a 21st century upgrade? Beautiful two questions, and these are connected straight to the main idea. I'll just explain these two questions over here for you because you are sitting here to learn, right? थोड़ा सा learn करेंगे, थोड़ा सा speed pick करेंगे. It has to be a combination of both, right? No. But what if the question of genetic inheritance were even more nuanced? We think it's as easy as pie. It's something so simple, but what if it were more complex than what it appears to be? What if the old polarized debate, if you are a CAT aspirant, you must have heard about nature versus nurture. Nature is what we inherit from our genes. Nurture is who takes care of us. So if I was born, let's say in a very poor family with parents who used to fight like cats and dogs and kind of, maybe, sorry, with apologies to my parents, so maybe, like ganda system ghar ka, and then what happened, I was up for adoption. And then some parents came, like a set of parents came and they took me home, and they were very refined, polished, sophisticated people, okay, who did not believe in doing such things. Would I be more affected by nature, my genes, or nurture? Nurture means where you grow up, under what influence. This is what it is saying. What if the old polarized debate, from here we understand that this debate has always been there. Polarized bole to extremes. Polarization of Hindus and Muslims, extremes. North Pole, South Pole. So what he says here is, what if the old polarized debate about the competing influences was due a 21st century upgrade? What if that debate, which had taken the back seats, is now due for an upgrade? Shouldn't it be brought to the front seat now, because there is some research being done on it? This is what the author asks us, and this is going to support your main idea. So our author does not support this received wisdom blindly. He says, yes, okay, fine, genes important hai. But then there is something else too. After this, I'm going to move my car to second and third gear. Kaise? Abhi aap dekho. Scientists working in the emerging field of epigenetics, if you have external knowledge of epigenetics, dictionary meaning ke ilawa. External knowledge, we don't apply external knowledge to our RC passage, but epigenetics is there in the dictionary. So when I'm learning the dictionary meaning of epigenetics, I'll expand my learning base and I'll read something on epigenetics. Whatever I explained to you in the beginning, that is epigenetics. So if I know a little about epigenetics, this all is going to seem very easy to me. Still, how are we going to do the reading? Scientists working in the emerging field of epigenetics have discovered the mechanism that allows lived experience and acquired knowledge to be passed on within one generation by altering the shape of a particular gene. Right? Altering the shape. You don't modify the DNA as such, but you're just kind of affecting the gene in such a way. So he says here, acquired knowledge and lived experience. Your brain should be sharp enough to understand that here the author is coming up with something that is different from this. And now, since the earlier one said genes, he's talking about something that is acquired, and he says this can be passed on within one generation by altering this. This means what? I'm going to read this because yahan means hai. This is how you understand the important zones. An individual's life experience doesn't die. Let's say I don't know the meaning of epigenetics. I'll have to read this zone because I need to understand what epigenetics is. If I know the meaning, I'll skim that portion, I'll move on to the next para. This means that an individual's life experience doesn't die, endures in a genetic form, impact, okay, Dutch grandmother, this is an example. I can read it if I want to understand further, right? If I know the meaning, I'm going to skim it and move on. Chalo, done. So our author supports epigenetics. Now he has brought in his main idea here. This cannot be the main idea. Received wisdom is never the main idea if the author goes against it. Okay, so this is the main idea connected with these two questions. I don't need to read this para because I know what epigenetics is, and now I know beforehand, like even before I go to the paragraphs, I know that he's going to come in with experiment because question 1 said so. He's going to talk about some researchers, somebody who gave this, who gave that. ऐसा, ठीक है? चलो. Much of the early epigenetic work was performed in model organisms including mice, okay, mice, okay. Immediately to a mild electric shock, okay, mice, अच्छा, he's talking about some experiment in which mice को कुछ love of cherries. Cherry like smell, immediately mild electric shock, okay, freeze, डर लगने लगा उनको उससे. If I know the earlier cat passage, almonds and mice, आसान हो गया समझने में. At this point the scientists took up the experiment again. Could the acquired association of a shock transmitted to the third generation? Question. जहां भी आप question देखो ना, that is very very important and that is connected to the main idea. This is what they're looking for. It had finished. Now you can skim. Yes, they proved it that yes, it could be transmitted to the next generation. The grandpaps, how had this happened? Team discovered, okay, this in turn changed, okay, pura technical. I'm not interested in reading the technical part. Rerouting, okay, involved the gene, okay, olfactory receptor combination, okay, blah blah, but वो bad, पता नहीं क्या बकवास है, technical है, right? You can skim this, and then you go over to the next one. The study's authors wanted to rule out the possibility that learning by imitation might have played a part. You see this? अब cat का अगर passage होता ना, ये paragraph हटा देते कि भाई उसमें experiment हुआ, next para would be क्या, what did they find out? यहाँ I have included one more para because इसमें मजेदार point है. The study's authors wanted to rule out the possibility that learning by imitation might have played a part. Means the next generation, let's say I'm a chooha and then I give birth to another chooha. My chooha sees me, I don't eat almonds, I feel scared, so the chooha inherits it. Not through gene. The authors wanted to rule out that possibility कि घर में देख देख करके वो सीख गया. Because they wanted to prove that my chooha bachcha had inherited it from me. Right? This is what they wanted to prove. So, घर में देखते देखते सीख गया, घर में देखते देखते उसको लगा almond कोई गंदी चीज है. They wanted to rule that out. So they took some of the mice as descendants. Let's say मेरे 15 बच्चे थे. तौबा है भाई, हाँ, and fostered them out. चूहा भी बना लिया अपने आप को, हाँ. They also took the sperm from the original, used this, raised them away from their biological parents. So took the sperm and all, जो बच्चे कुछ पैदा हुए, ठीक है, ये देखो, used IVF to conceive more pups. माइस के और बच्चे वो sperm लेकर के IVF में किया उन लोगों ने, and then उन बच्चों को kept those बच्चे away from the biological parents. तो घर पे तो नहीं रह रहे वो बच्चे, ओरिजिनल पेरेंट्स के साथ तो नहीं है. सो व्हाट वुड हैपन? ये रूल आउट करने से देख देख के नहीं सीख रहे हैं, नहीं आना चाहिए उनको. बट यहां पे क्या हुआ? द fostered pups and those that had been conceived still had increased sensitivity and different for the perception of that particular scent. They were still scared of it no matter where they were brought up. Okay, just to clinch things, pups of mice not experienced with shocks did not show these changes even if they were fostered by parents who had. Some other pups, some other mice के बच्चे, you know, उसमें ये बोला है कि had not experienced the traumatic linking of cherries with shocks, उनको नहीं मिला था वो, did not show these changes even if they were fostered by parents who had. Let's say I adopt some other बच्चे and their parents had not experienced that shock. So those bachche are going to live here with me and still they will not be scared of it. So the authors basically are trying to prove, the researchers are trying to prove that it can be inherited. Through genes? No, genes separate hai. It can be inherited from parents because that particular acquired behavior affects your genes in a certain way. It affects it in such a way that it passes on down to the next one. The most exciting thing of all occurred when the researchers set out to investigate whether this could have been reversed. Don't read the para. This is saying, could it have been reversed? Right? यहाँ बोला है they took grandparents, okay, anatomically, crucially was no longer passed. So yes, it could be reversed. Right? Then neural circuits reverted to their original format. I skimmed it and I saw what they are trying to prove. I skimmed this para and I saw, okay, they still had increased sensitivity. कहीं भी पालो उनको, कहीं भी बड़ा करो. Right? Then I move on to this. Could the same thing hold true for humans? Do you see this? That there's that question. इतना बड़ा para? No, we are not going to read it. So don't be scared. just like the mice. Studies on Holocaust survivors. I like this topic. Ab dekho. We are studying epigenetics and now Holocaust comes in. Holocaust survivors and their children carried out in 2020. Okay, ये सब skim करो. Revealed what? Effects of parental trauma. The parents had seen those kind of, the horror chamber, the gas chambers, the atrocities, whatever क्या नाम था उसका, Hitler, whatever Hitler had done, these parents had witnessed all of that, right? So since they had witnessed the atrocities, now that has kind of passed on to their children. This is what they are saying. Trauma can indeed be passed on in this way. Her first study showed that participants carried genes. Okay, now I'm not going to read it because this is all technical. Go down to the last line. This information could aid PTSD or even preemptively screen who might be more, so this can be helpful. If you apply the same thing to humans, this can be helpful. These changes weaken the barrier, white blood cells, interference, depression, So if you pass this on, if this is passed on from parents to children, humans may be, that's why, it explains like these things, depression, anxiety, psychosis, autism, etc. Yeah. And then they came up with this, that this information could help understand it further and resolve things in PTSD. Yeah, preemptively is a positive word. Means before actually, not as a reaction. Before you see the disease, you can actually act. In all times and across all cultures, is this the last para? Yes, so I'm going to read this. In all times and across all cultures, people have paid their dues to their ancestors and pondered the legacy that they will leave for their descendants. Ancestors को हम बहुत वो देते हैं, इसके बाप दादा परदादा ने ये किया था, right? Few of us believe, मतलब ना के बराबर, any more that biology is necessarily destiny or that our bloodline determines who we are. हम मानते नहीं हैं, है ना? And yet, ये कह रहा है, we don't believe anymore that biology is destiny or that our bloodline determines. My father had this acquired behavior, it passed on to me. My grandfather had this acquired behavior, so it passed on to my dad along with the genes. Okay, and yet the more we learn about how our body and mind work together to shape our experience, the more we can see that our life story is woven into our biology. The author is trying to emphasize the importance of biology over here. It's not just our body that keeps the score, but our very genes. Now, the last paragraph will confuse you. You'll say, Ari, end May, he's again talking about genes. In the beginning, he said, no, besides genes, there is something else, epigenetic. That is where I'm telling you, do a little bit of external reading, because without reading too much, you will be able to understand. Acha. Earlier, people said only genes, only genetics. Okay, nothing extra. Then he said, epigenetics comes into the picture. Epigenetics is how you acquire a behavior. That acquired behavior affects your genes. It doesn't modify the DNA. It affects the genes in such a way that the gene is further passed down to your child. So that acquired characteristic is passed down through your genes. So what he's trying to say is, whatever we inherit has a lot to do with what our father, our grandfather, our great-grandfather did, what they had, what love they had acquired, what hatred they had acquired. Got it? Nice passage. I hope you liked it. But I'll tell you something here now. Gyan point. Cat would have cut this para. Hold true for humans, and then yahan se probably they would have deleted the entire thing. Okay. Cat would have skipped which one? I'll tell you. Reversed. Yeah. So 2 paragraphs to aise ukhad gaye. Okay. Cat would have cut this into half. ये technical इतना जो है ना, आधा निकाल के. Got it? That is how they abridge their passages. I just picked the entire thing because I fell in love with this passage. Okay. So, we are done with this. Now, I'll take you forward to the questions. From the passage, which of the following can be inferred about the researcher's interpretation? Interpretation of the results. This is spread over the entire thing. Right, I can come to this later. If I have understood epigenetics very well, I would want to go with this right now. So the results were what? That It can be passed down. Let's eliminate. They believe the environmental conditions faced by the grandparent generation directly altered DNA sequences in the grandchildren. Okay. Environmental conditions faced by the grandparent directly. I'm not sure about this. Let's keep it. They consider epigenetic inheritance to be entirely independent of the genetic material passed down. Entirely independent? Entirely independent? No, but what he said was like, this epigenetic inheritance, epi and genetic, beyond genes, this affects your genes in such a way that you pass it down. So entirely independent can be a red flag. Okay. They conclude that environmental stress can only influence traits if exposure occurs during early developmental stages of the affected generation. During the early developmental stages, if exposure occurs, I did not read any such point in the passage. I mean, even if I go back and I do the mapping, जैसे पहले हमने reading की, देखो ये, he talks about received wisdom, another para on received wisdom, and then questions, then he comes up with epigenetics and how it affects us, and then he comes up with the rat wala experiment, and then the experiment was done again, and a lot of technical stuff, and then the authors wanted to rule out one possibility. Then the most exciting thing was to see if it was reversible or irreversible, and then on humans, and then the conclusion that everything is genes. It's not just our body but our genes too. Yeah. So when I go back to this, they conclude that environmental stress can only influence traits if exposure occurs during early developmental stages. Early, late, doesn't matter. So this is again a red flag. So I'm left with A and D. You can see now the difference between the two, then I'll take you back and you decide. Researchers' interpretation. They view epigenetic changes as a mechanism that allows environmental factors to influence phenotypic traits across generations without altering the genetic code. This one says without altering, this one says directly altered DNA sequences in the grandchildren. This is the difference. Go back and verify it. It's as simple as that, right? So last में जब दो बचते हैं, this is what you're supposed to do. Okay? Directly altered DNA or without altering. चलिए. Researchers का conclusion. ठीक है? You can check here. The team discovered that the DNA had changed shape. Okay? Acquired association transmitted to the third generation. Sensitive. The team discovered that the DNA had changed shape. This in turn changed the way neuronal circuit was laid down, rerouting this, reward circuits, the gene for this had this, so that the circuits for detecting, okay. Total technical, but वो bad news जो कुछ भी इसने दिया, right? And then यहाँ पे still increase the sensitivity. Cool. And then wherever you find DNA, ये तो IVF ठीक है, उन लोगों ने IVF से किया and they kind of wanted to see if it was reversible or not. And then you go to humans. But humans में तो again that was like if this can be used for treatment of diseases and depression and all ऐसा type. So you can go probably here. The team discovered the DNA had changed shape. Did it change it completely, directly? यहाँ पे ये देखो. The paragraph that talks about the actual thing, the epigenetic thing, discovered the mechanism that allows lived experience to be passed on within one generation by altering the shape of a particular gene. Individual's life experience doesn't die with them, endures in genetic form. The impact of the starvation, for example, when he fled his home, might go on to shape your parents' brains, their behaviors, and eventually yours. Right? Now I take you back to the question here. It's between this and this. They believe the environmental conditions faced by the grandparent generation directly altered DNA sequences in the grandchildren. Directly altered. There he has spoken about changing the shape and then it does this. Technical wala paragraph if you read. This does this and this does this and this does this. They view epigenetic changes as a mechanism that allows environmental factors to influence phenotypic traits. Okay, that's connected to your brain and whatever, DNA and all across generations without altering the genetic code. So directly altered and without altering. Now if you go back and see the shape had been altered, right? Yahan DNA had changed shape. This is not exactly directly altering. ये क्योंकि आगे बोला है, आप देखो in turn, ये दिख रहा है in turn. DNA had changed shape. This in turn changed the way this was done, rerouting this and this and this and this. So directly changed, directly altered is kind of extreme. So this is eliminated and this should be your answer. Clear? Next. Which of the following best explains why the researchers stressed methylation patterns rather than mutations in their conclusions? Okay, methylation, mutations. Look for that. Go back. Conclusion jab tha na? Okay. Check now. Next slide, I'll clear it. Mutation dictionary meaning you should know, ठीक है? Used IVF, ये तो वो वाला paragraph है, right? And then here neural circuits original, okay. Let me just clear this as well. All right. Now, I have got a ज्ञान point here. अभी देखो आप ढूंढ रहे हो methylation, right? Obviously that is something very technical, but you're not able to find it here. Maybe you know it's given here. यहाँ पे तो हो नहीं सकता because it's technical. So when they started with the experiment, after that they could have talked about this. यहाँ पे accommodate this, okay, ill health, some okay, fantastically complex matrix, inheritance okay, nature. Now, if you are confused about this, where is the methylation thing? यहीं पे गड़बड़ हो जाती है. The student keeps looking for that. ऐसा कैसे नहीं मिलेगा? साल इसकी तो ऐसी की तैसी, मैं तो आज इसको मार कर रहूंगा. Do not do that, please. ठीक है? तो ये क्वेश्चन अगर आपको नहीं मिल रहा है, मिथाइलेशन कहाँ है, that is technical, but है कहाँ पे? अभी obviously I know you could have found it here, demethylated जो कुछ भी है यहाँ, demethylated, but अगर नहीं मिल रहा है, what I'm saying is please leave it for later. You'll come across this somewhere. Okay, the hint over here is that obviously methylation patterns है तो technical paragraph में ही होगा, right? Move on to the next one. Which of the following scenarios would most strongly support the conclusions of the experiment? Now you know the conclusions from the first question, correct? Look for some similarity. That is what we do in this. A study finds that identical twins separated at birth and raised in vastly different climates develop identical adult phenotypes. Okay, raised in vastly different climates. Okay, they develop identical. I'll keep this. A group of fish exposed to pollutants shows altered gene expression patterns, and these changes are observed in 2 subsequent unexposed generations. This is talking about next generation. Okay, again I'll keep this. A population of plants develops thicker leaves after a decade of drought. Drought आया, external environment का हुआ affect, thicker leaves, but the trait disappears in the next generation when rainfall returns to normal. Next generation तो गया ही नहीं, so this is out. A genetic study finds that a certain trait in rabbits is caused by a single base pair mutation in their DNA sequence. A certain trait is caused. Okay, it may have been caused. Single base pair mutation in their DNA sequence. It's talking about mutation. DNA mutation, gene mutation. That is not the topic. Epigenetic means passing it down. Inheriting it, right? So inheriting it means this is eliminated and I'm left with A and B. Now what is the difference between these two? It has to talk about inheritance, right? A study finds that identical twins separated at birth and raised in vastly different climates develop identical adult phenotypes. So identical adult phenotypes, this is not talking about acquired behavior, right? This is talking about phenotypes. In case you are doubtful about what phenotypes is, you can go back to the passage and check. Now, a group of fish exposed to pollutants, group of fish, pollutants, too much of silver in the water, mercury, right? shows altered gene expression patterns. Gene expression alter हुआ. Remember, it's reversible from the passage. Alter हुआ. And these changes are observed in two subsequent unexposed generations. The next generation is not exposed to mercury or whatever pollutants. ठीक है? Still they inherit it. This is observed in that. This goes more with the conclusion. So this is your answer. Okay. Question 4. If the researcher's hypothesis is correct, which of the following would most likely be true in a related study on humans? Humans ka para. Right? So humans ka para, if you go and check now, hold true for humans, right? Studies on Holocaust survivors, okay, ye sab bakwas, revealed what? Effects of parental trauma can indeed be passed on this way. Okay. Her first study showed that participants carried changes, levels of cortisol, involved in stress response, so find expression changes, immune system function, weaken the barrier of white blood, agar mere parents ko tha mujhe pass hua hai, right, and linked to depression, anxiety, and then they are hopeful that this information could help. Okay, now here, would most likely be true. Descendants of individuals exposed to famine conditions, again this is an application question connected with a specific para. Descendants of individuals exposed to famine conditions might show altered metabolic traits, famine conditions, people who were like exposed to famine condition and they kind of used to suppress their hunger because there wasn't any food to eat. So it shows altered metabolic traits even if intermediate generations experienced adequate nutrition, right? Famine conditions, altered intermediate generations. Now this is talking about beach ka kahin, intermediate wala, but it's talking about passing it down, right? So I'll keep this. Grandchildren of malnourished women would inherit the same nutritional deficiencies regardless of the mother's diet during pregnancy. This is talking about, this is not giving you this is not giving you acquired. Ye dekh rahe ho? Malnourished women, they are malnourished, ठीक है? Inherit the same nutritional deficiency. It is in their body. Okay, so if my mother had some deficiency that passed down onto me, that is proper genes, correct? Regardless, ये दिया है ना word, regardless of the mother's diet during pregnancy. Let's say during the pregnancy period, in the first trimester, the mother ate very well. But in the second and third trimester, she neglected herself completely. That was acquired. She developed some allergy to prawns and developed some allergy to curry patta and some all that nonsense. Okay, that was acquired. That can be passed down. But this says here regardless of her diet during pregnancy. So this gets eliminated. Right? Any phenotypic changes induced by the environmental conditions in one generation would vanish entirely in the next generation if the environment returned to normal. So pass on ही नहीं हो रहा है, तो how can this be connected to humans? So it's between A and D. What does D say? Epigenetic changes in humans would only occur if there were simultaneous genetic mutations reinforcing them. Genetic mutations, again, complete changing of DNA, that is genetic mutations. This is not being talked about in the human context. So this is out. So let's go back to A and read it again. Famine conditions might show, again, balanced, altered metabolic traits, because this was acquired. They were not used to staying hungry, but then because of some external condition, they started suppressing their hunger. They became anorexic, that is lack of appetite for food. That in turn started affecting the metabolism. So metabolism, intermediate generations experienced. Even if intermediate generations, do not be distracted by this. ठीक है, बीच का एक आध जनरेशन में हो सकता नहीं वो आया, they means they were exposed to nutrition, but still this generation faced that, so वो तो pass down तो होगा ही ना. So this is the one that they are talking about related to humans. Okay, ये हो गया. Now we go back to this technical one, methylation patterns rather than mutations. So this is like methylation, technical वाले में फिर से चले जाओ, technical में ही होना चाहिए ये. Demethylated, right? I'm going to read this a little. Could the acquired association of a shock with the sweet smell have been transmitted? It had. The grandpups were highly fearful, more sensitive. How had this happened? The team discovered that the DNA had changed shape. right? Only shape. This in turn changed the way the neuronal related to brain, and was laid down in his pups, rerouting some nerve cells from the nose, from the pleasure and reward circuits, and connecting them to this which is involved in fear. How it is connected वो बताया. I'm not interested in that. The gene for this olfactory receptor, olfactory is nose, okay, sense of smell, had been demethylated, chemically tagged, so that the circuits for detecting it were enhanced, right? Through a combination of these changes cascaded across generations to ensure acquire the hard-won wisdom. Okay. So we understood this part that methylation wala jo bol raha had been demethylated. What is he trying to say? The gene for this olfactory receptor had been demethylated, chemically tagged. Okay, so that what? The circuits for detecting it were enhanced. Confusion hai? In the test, you can leave such a question, right? Very welcome to do that. But in case you want to just, in case you're able to understand all this and you know how to infer very well because you're an avid reader, quickly go back to the question and try to see the options. This helps me very often. यहाँ देखो, methylation patterns क्या कहना चाह रहा है question? Why the researchers stressed methylation patterns rather than mutations in their conclusions? Okay. So methylation, mutation. Okay. Now, what is he saying? ऐसा यहाँ पे eliminate नहीं कर सकते कि methylation का eliminate कर दो, mutation रखेंगे या mutation को eliminate कर दो, नहीं. Methylation is a form of DNA damage that permanently changes the sequence and is therefore more relevant to inherited traits. Okay. He stressed methylation. DNA damage that permanently changes. Is he talking about methylation because, methylation permanently changes the sequence, inherited traits, okay? Methylation can regulate gene expression without changing the underlying sequence, aligning with the observation, altered traits, okay? You see the balanced words? Mutations are rare in natural populations, whereas methylation is a universal process. I can see a trap. These are POE traps, okay? So I put a red flag here. Mutations are reversible. How can mutation be reversible? Okay, whereas methylation changes are irreversible once established. No, he is giving you the opposite. So this is out because the dictionary meaning of mutation and methylation, the student, if the student knows, he can eliminate. Okay, so mutations are reversible. Mutation is complete change. So I get this. This is opposite. This is ulta and weird. So I mark this as eliminated. This is red flag. So universal process, I wouldn't want to go with this. Can regulate, and this one says permanently changes the sequence. Here, play smart. Go back to the question. Why have the researchers stressed methylation rather than mutation? They don't want mutation, they want methylation. This is what the question is saying. Why? And going with what the conclusion was, it wasn't a complete change. Ek paragraph said irreversible nahi tha, reversible tha. So the researchers didn't want it to be completely permanent, right? So between these two, obviously this has to be an answer without changing the underlying sequence, aligning with this without genetic mutations. Now, what am I trying to prove with this question? If I wanted, I could have changed this question and given you something easier, right? But 2 points here. Number 1, please leave this question if it's too confusing for you. Number 2, please, as I showed you here, go to the options. देखो यहाँ पे ठंडे दिमाग से pause करो for 5 seconds. What is he asking? If you have understood the conclusion well and you know the dictionary meaning of at least mutation, if not methylation, you will be able to understand this. And with the option elimination, you can play the game. I hope this is clear, guys. I'm done with my super duper bumper passage and I hope it has been a nice learning experience for you. So DBBA, yes, we solved this, done, sorted. I'm going to be back soon with yet another rocking passage. Keep learning. Thank you.